Once upon a time in the village of Unis, a place where men reign supreme and women are relegated to the background. The culture of Unis is rooted in strict gender roles, with men holding all positions of power, ranging from the village council to the household. Women, though intelligent and hardworking, are bound by societal rules that stifle their independence. At the heart of this city lies a towering palace where the ruling family, headed by the elders, keeps a firm grip on the populace. The men, from the wealthiest landowners to the poorest farmers, are raised with the belief that they are superior, their word law, and their desires unquestionable. Unis is a man's world, and for generations, women have suffered in silence. But the winds of change are beginning to stir. Among the women of Unis, there is one who refuses to live within the boundaries set by tradition, Nkechi, the daughter of Amora, a widow known for her kindness and resilience. From her earliest years, Nkechi was different. She was not content to sit quietly, as her mother and other women did. She was not afraid to speak her mind and question the ways of the world around her. As a child, Nkechi often wandered the streets of Unis, observing the way men treated women. She watched her mother labor tirelessly in the fields while her father, when he was still alive, would sit and drink with other men, dismissing her mother's hard work as insignificant. When Nkechi saw boys at school mocking the girls, she would step in, her sharp tongue and quick reflexes earning her the label of a troublemaker. Her mother, Amora, both proud and fearful of her daughter, would often warn Nkechi to be careful. "Nkechi, my child, the world is not kind to girls who speak too loudly," she would say, her eyes filled with worry. But Nkechi would respond with defiance, "If I don't speak, who will?" Her boldness set her apart from her peers, and it didn't take long before the boys in the village began to resent her. Teachers complained to her mother about her attitude, and the boys at school would try to pick fights with her. But no matter what they did, Nkechi never backed down. Even as a child, she had a strength that unnerved the people around her. Nkechi's strength was not merely in her words. As she grew older, she began to seek out knowledge beyond what was taught in school. One day, while wandering near the edge of the city, she stumbled upon an old woman named Aurora, who lived alone in a small hut deep within the forest. Aurora was a mystery to the people of Unis. Some whispered that she was a witch, others said she was a healer. But no one really knew her story. Intrigued by the old woman, Nkechi began to visit her regularly, learning more about her craft. Aurora, seeing the fire in the young girl's eyes, decided to teach her the art of self-defense. Nkechi trained day and night, learning how to fight with her bare hands, how to defend herself against attackers, and how to use her agility and speed to overpower even the strongest of men. As she grew stronger, her confidence increased, and she became a force to be reckoned with. The story continues with more thrilling encounters, conflicts, and revelations, leading Nkechi to challenge the entire city of Unis in her fight for justice and equality. By the time Nkechi turned 20, her reputation as a strong, unyielding woman spread throughout Unis. The men of the city, who were used to commanding women with a mere glance, found themselves unnerved by her presence. She spoke out against injustice, ridiculed the foolish pride of the men, and helped women stand up for themselves. However, her growing influence was becoming a problem. One evening, Nkechi was walking through the busy streets of Unis when a group of young men approached her. These were not ordinary men, but some of the most arrogant sons of the city's wealthiest families, known for their rowdy behavior and disrespect toward women. Their leader, Nchi, sneered at Nkechi as he blocked her path. "Where are you going in such a hurry, Nkechi?" he taunted, stepping in front of her. "Don't you know a woman should ask permission before walking past a man?" The other men laughed, expecting Nkechi to either cower in fear or talk back as she often did. But Nkechi wasn't in the mood for words. Instead, she stood her ground, staring Nchi in the eye without saying a word. Her silence only infuriated him. "What? Have you lost your tongue? Or are you too proud to answer?" Nchi jeered, reaching out to grab her arm. But before his hand could touch her, Nkechi moved with lightning speed, catching his wrist and twisting it with such force that Nchi yelped in pain. In an instant, she flipped him to the ground with a thud that silenced his friends. The other men, stunned by what they had just witnessed, tried to rush her, but Nkechi was prepared. One by one, she overpowered them, using her training from Aurora to throw, kick, and punch her way through the group. Within minutes, the men were sprawled across the ground, groaning in pain and clutching their bruises. Nkechi stood tall, unbothered, and looked down at them. "Tell your fathers that Unis is changing, and women will no longer bow to your arrogance," she said coldly before walking away, leaving the men humiliated. News of the fight spread like wildfire throughout Unis. Women whispered in awe about Nkechi's bravery, while men talked of her insolence. For the first time in the city's history, a woman had physically bested several men, and it terrified the village elders. They feared that Nkechi's defiance would inspire other women to rise up, disrupting the delicate balance of power. In the grand hall of the palace, the elders gathered to discuss what they saw as a growing threat. The oldest elder, Unis, stroked his white beard thoughtfully. "This Nkechi is a danger to the peace and order of Unis. If she is not stopped, our women will soon follow her example, and we will lose control." "But what can we do?" asked one of the younger elders, his voice laced with anxiety. "She has already defeated several men. Who is strong enough to stop her?" Before anyone could answer, a voice from the shadows spoke. It was Prince Ifini, the heir to the throne, and he was intrigued by the rumors about Nkechi. The prince was known for his charm, good looks, and cunning mind, but he had a darker side, one that very few people knew about. "Let me handle this Nkechi," Ifini said with a smirk. "She is strong, yes, but she is still just a woman. I will make sure she knows her place." The elders, desperate for a solution, agreed to let the prince deal with her. But Ifini's interest in Nkechi was not just about restoring order. There was something about her strength that fascinated him, something that made him want to see her up close. Days later, Nkechi received a message summoning her to the palace. She knew it was a trap, but she went anyway, determined to face whatever challenge came her way. When she arrived, the courtyard was filled with men, elders, soldiers, and nobles, all waiting to witness the confrontation. At the center of the crowd stood Prince Ifini, his arms crossed, watching her approach with a smug smile. "Nkechi of Unis," he called out, his voice echoing through the courtyard. "I have heard of your strength, but I am not convinced. I challenge you to a duel. If you win, you may leave freely, and I will honor your victory. But if I win, you will bow before me and never challenge a man again." The crowd gasped at the boldness of the challenge. No one had ever dared to challenge the prince, but Nkechi, unfazed, stepped forward and accepted. The duel began, and the crowd watched in stunned silence. Ifini was strong, fast, and skilled, but Nkechi was faster. Each of his attacks was met with a counter, and she moved with a grace and power that left him struggling to keep up. As the fight dragged on, it became clear that the prince was losing. With a final, decisive move, Nkechi knocked him to the ground, standing over him victorious. The crowd erupted into chaos. Men shouted in disbelief, while women whispered excitedly among themselves. The prince lay on the ground, humiliated and defeated. The aftermath of the duel sent shockwaves through Unis. The prince's defeat at the hands of a woman was unthinkable, and the elders were furious. The men of the city were outraged, feeling that their pride had been shattered, while the women secretly admired Nkechi's bravery. Prince Ifini, consumed with anger and humiliation, retreated to the palace, refusing to see anyone. His defeat weighed heavily on him, but it was more than just the loss. For the first time, he had encountered a woman who was not only his equal, but his superior in strength. It gnawed at him, making him question everything he had been taught about men's superiority over women. Meanwhile, Nkechi's name became legendary. Women across Unis began to speak more openly about their discontent, emboldened by her example. In homes and marketplaces, quiet conversations about change began to take place. The winds of revolution were stirring, and Nkechi was at the center of it all. Behind Prince Ifini's arrogance and charm lay a painful past. As a boy, he had witnessed the cruelty of his father, the late king, toward his mother. The king, obsessed with power and control, treated the queen like a mere servant. Ifini had grown up believing that strength and dominance were the only ways to maintain power, and that women were inherently weak and inferior. His father's death had left him with deep-seated insecurities about his own ability to rule. He constantly sought to prove himself as a strong leader, suppressing any sign of weakness. His hatred of women, especially those who challenged him, was rooted in his fear of losing control. Nkechi's victory had shattered the image he had of himself, and now he was left questioning everything he believed. While the city buzzed with the story of Nkechi's victory, few knew the true reason behind her strength. As a child, Nkechi had witnessed unspeakable horrors. Her father, a cruel and abusive man, had terrorized her mother, Amora. Nkechi often hid in the shadows, watching as her mother endured beatings and humiliation. One night, the abuse escalated beyond what Amora could bear, and in a moment of desperate self-defense, she fought back, accidentally killing her husband. The trauma of that night haunted Nkechi, shaping her into the fierce woman she had become. She vowed never to let any man control her or any other woman in Unis again. Her strength came not only from her training, but from the pain and anger she carried with her. Each fight she won was a victory for her mother, for herself, and for every woman who had ever been oppressed. Nkechi's victory over the prince sparked something profound in the hearts of the women of Unis. For centuries, they had been treated as second-class citizens, voiceless and powerless in a world dominated by men. But now, with Nkechi as their inspiration, whispers of rebellion began to ripple through the city. Groups of women gathered in secret, away from the watchful eyes of their husbands, brothers, and fathers. They spoke of freedom, of equality, and of no longer living in fear. Slowly, the women began to resist. They stopped bowing their heads in submission when men spoke. They demanded better treatment in the marketplace, and some even refused to perform their daily tasks unless they were treated with respect. The men of Unis, accustomed to the silence and obedience of their women, were stunned by this sudden change. Many tried to force the women back into their traditional roles, using threats and violence. But these attempts were met with increasing resistance. Some of the younger women, inspired by Nkechi's fighting spirit, sought her out, asking her to teach them how to defend themselves. Nkechi began to train a small group of women in secret, teaching them the same martial arts techniques she had learned from Adora. These women were determined to fight for their freedom, and their numbers grew with each passing week. Soon, the entire city of Unis buzzed with the quiet but unstoppable momentum of a revolution. The growing unrest among the women of Unis did not go unnoticed by the village elders. They had hoped that Prince Ifini's defeat would be a one-time embarrassment, but now it seemed that Nkechi's influence was threatening the very fabric of their society. The elders were not just concerned about the uprising of women, they feared that their own power was slipping through their fingers. In a private meeting, the elders gathered to discuss their next move. "This woman is becoming more dangerous with each passing day," said Unis, the oldest and most respected of the elders. "If we do not act now, Unis will fall into chaos." "But we cannot defeat her in combat," one of the younger elders interjected. "She has already proven that no man in this city can best her." "We don't need to fight her with fists," Unis responded, his voice cold and calculating. "We can destroy her with words. If we make the people believe that Nkechi is a danger to them, they will turn on her. We will spread rumors, lies, whatever it takes to ruin her reputation. Once the people no longer see her as a hero, we will banish her from Unis forever." The plan was simple but effective. Over the next few weeks, the elders spread stories about Nkechi being a witch who used dark magic to overpower men. They accused her of trying to destroy the sacred traditions of Unis, painting her as a villain who was leading women astray. They whispered these lies into the ears of the people, hoping to turn the city against her. At first, the rumors were met with skepticism, but slowly, doubt began to creep into the minds of the people. Could it be true that Nkechi was using unnatural powers? Was she really trying to overthrow the entire city? The men, especially, were eager to believe these stories, desperate to reclaim their lost authority. Despite the rumors, Nkechi continued to fight for the women of Unis. But the tension in the city was palpable, and she knew that the elders were planning something. It wasn't long before their intentions became clear. One morning, Nkechi was summoned to the grand hall of the palace to stand before the village council. The entire city gathered to witness the confrontation, and the air was thick with anticipation. The elders sat in a row, their faces stern and unyielding, while Nkechi stood before them, unafraid. "Elders of Unis," Nkechi began, her voice steady, "you have summoned me here, but I already know why. You fear change, and you fear the strength of women. But I am not here to destroy Unis. I am here to make it better, for all of us." The eldest of the council, Unis, spoke. Nkechi, you stand accused of disrupting the peace of our city, of using dark magic to manipulate and overpower men, and of leading the women of Unis into rebellion. How do you answer these charges? I answer them with the truth, Nkechi replied boldly. I have done nothing but fight for what is right. I have used no magic, only the strength of my body and the will of my spirit. And if I have led the women of Unis to rise, it is because they have seen the injustice that you have inflicted upon them. Her words resonated with the women in the crowd, who murmured their agreement. But the elders were unmoved. You speak of justice, but what you bring is chaos, Ys continued, his voice rising. The men of this city have kept order for generations, and now you seek to overturn everything we have built. This cannot be allowed to continue. With that, the council declared that Nkechi was to be banished from Unis, never to return. The crowd gasped in shock, but Nkechi remained defiant. You may banish me, she said, but you cannot banish the spirit of change. The women of Unis will not go back to the way things were, no matter what you do. My fight was never for me alone, it was for them. Nkechi's banishment sent ripples of anger through the women of Unis. They had watched her stand up to the elders, fight for their rights, and refuse to back down in the face of oppression. Now, with Nkechi forced out of the city, the women knew they had to continue what she had started. Led by some of the women who had trained with Nkechi, a rebellion began to form. They no longer asked for their rights, they demanded them. They marched to the palace, a crowd of hundreds, their voices united in a call for equality and justice. The men, seeing the rising tide of anger among the women, tried to stop them with force. But the women were prepared. They fought back, defending themselves just as Nkechi had taught them. The men of Unis, realizing that they were no match for the determination of the women, began to retreat. The rebellion shook the foundations of Unis, and soon even the elders began to realize that their grip on power was slipping. The old ways were crumbling, and a new order was beginning to take shape. Far from Unis, Nkechi watched as news of the rebellion reached her. She had been living in exile, but her heart was still with the women of her city. As the rebellion grew, Nkechi knew that her return would only escalate the violence. She didn't want the women to suffer the same kind of brutal backlash that she had witnessed in her childhood. In a moment of deep reflection, Nkechi made a painful decision. She would offer herself as a sacrifice to end the violence. If her banishment was the price for peace, she would accept it. She sent a message to the elders, offering to leave Unis forever if they promised to listen to the women's demands and work toward equality. The elders, desperate to restore order, accepted her offer. Nkechi's ultimate sacrifice was not in defeat, but in the hope that her absence would allow the women of Unis to rebuild their society without further bloodshed. With Nkechi gone, Unis began a slow but meaningful transformation. The women of the city continued to fight for their rights, and the men, reluctantly at first, began to listen. Small changes took root. Women were allowed to speak in the village council, girls were given the same education as boys, and the harsh rules that had once kept women in submission were slowly dismantled. Though Nkechi was no longer in the city, her legacy lived on. Her name became a symbol of strength and courage, and her story was passed down from generation to generation. Women spoke of her with pride, and even the men came to respect the woman who had changed Unis forever. Nkechi's sacrifice had paved the way for a new future, one where women and men stood as equals, and the old ways of oppression were left behind. Though her journey had been fraught with pain and struggle, Nkechi's spirit lived on in the hearts of all those who believed in justice. And so, the city of Unis, once a place of rigid traditions and male dominance, became a city of equality and hope, where the fight for justice never truly ended.